Number 1.
Some famous diamonds are set in pieces of jewelry, while others reside in museums. And then there are the really fascinating gems that have been stolen, lost, or otherwise disappeared into the mists of time. Today's gem, the Florentine Diamond, belongs to that roster of gone but not forgotten stones. The accounts of the earliest centuries of the diamond's post-discovery existence are, as is true with so many of these stones, a little more lore and legend than history. Most everyone seems to agree that the diamond was mined in India. It somehow made its way to Europe, but we don't really seem to know for certain whether that path involved transaction, theft, or a combination of the two. One version of the story connects the canary-colored diamond with the Portuguese colonial history of India. In that story, the diamond was acquired by the colonial governor of Goa from one of the kings of Vijayanagara, perhaps King Sriranga I, in the late 1500s. The story goes that the Portuguese official handed off the diamond to the Jesuits, who were conveniently running an inquisition in Goa at the time. They supposedly took the diamond to Rome, bringing it into the European world for the first time, where it was purchased by Ferdinando de' Medici, 1549 to 1609. But that's just one version of the story. Another version of the diamond's history finds it first in Bruges in the middle of the 15th century. There, it was supposedly transformed from a rough stone into the famous 137.27 carat faceted diamond by Lodewijk van Berken, an innovative Flemish diamond cutter. His patron, Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, 1433 to 1477, had commissioned him to cut the diamond. Charles supposedly brought the diamond with him to the battlefield, not a great move. And during a battle in the 1470s, he lost it. The story goes that it was picked up by a lowly soldier who didn't know the value of the yellow stone and sold it for a pittance. From there, it allegedly hopped from Switzerland to Genoa to Germany to Florence, maybe even making a quick stop at the Vatican. One thing is for certain, by 1657, the Florentine diamond was in the possession of Ferdinando II de' Medici, the Grand Duke of Tuscany. He showed the diamond to Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, the French famous jewel merchant and world traveler. You'll probably recognize Tavernier's name from his association with the famous Hope diamond. Tavernier wrote about the diamond in his memoirs, giving us one of the first documented references to the gem. The Medicis kept the diamond through their long tenure as rulers of Florence and Tuscany. When the last Medici Grand Duke died without an heir in 1737, he was succeeded by his second cousin, the Duke of Lorraine, who also became the new owner of the Florentine diamond. The Duke of Lorraine is better known to history as the Holy Roman Emperor Francis I. His wife, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria-Hungary, and lots of other places, including Milan and Parma, wielded the real power behind the scenes of their titles. You might recognize them as the parents of Marie Antoinette. Their marriage brought the diamond into the Habsburg imperial treasury, where it stayed for almost 2 centuries. In 1833, the New York Mirror published a travelogue from American writer Nathaniel Parker Willis that included a visit to the imperial treasury in Vienna. He described the Florentine as a lump of light. Willis wrote that even though enormous diamonds surround it, it hangs among them like Hesperus among the stars. The Habsburgs used and displayed the diamond in various ways, placing it in a crown, brooches, and a cap ornament, pictured above. By 1918, World War had ravaged Europe, and the Habsburgs were toppled from their imperial throne. The last imperial couple, Emperor Karl I and Empress Zita, fled with their family to Switzerland. Controversially, they took many of the crown jewels along with them, including the Florentine diamond. Some Austrians maintained that these jewels were the property of the state, and Karl had no right to abscond with them. And then, to make things even more complicated, the Italians also filed a claim over the Florentine diamond, arguing that the diamond had been willed by the Medicis to the people of Florence in the 18th century. By 1918, World War had ravaged Europe, and the Habsburgs were toppled from their imperial throne. The last imperial couple, Emperor Karl I and Empress Zita, fled with their family to Switzerland. Controversially, they took many of the crown jewels along with them, including the Florentine diamond. Some Austrians maintained that these jewels were the property of the state, and Karl had no right to abscond with them. And then, to make things even more complicated, the Italians also filed a claim over the Florentine diamond, arguing that the diamond had been willed by the Medicis to the people of Florence in the 18th century. The diamond vanished completely from public view. Some believed that it was stolen from the imperial family in exile, while others believed that the Habsburgs stashed the diamond in a Swiss bank and used it as collateral for substantial loans. In 1921, the London Observer's correspondent in Geneva wrote that the crown jewels taken by Karl are still in this country, so far as is known, and it is on these jewels that he must have received pecuniary advances. Matters were complicated yet again when Karl died in April 1922, leaving Zita with 8 children and little security or stability. Sensational press reports claimed that the Florentine diamond was the last barrier standing between the ex-empress and actual poverty. And she certainly needed the money, as her widowhood lasted for 76 years until her death in 1989. So what happened to the diamond next? I wish we had an answer to that question. There are rumors that it made its way to South America, or even to the United States. But in reality, there's been no substantiated appearance of the Florentine diamond in more than a century. The bright golden diamond shown above is actually a copy of the Florentine from a Munich museum. It's quite possibly the closest thing most of us will ever come to seeing the genuine article.
Number 2.
The Keechee Hills, deep in the Wichita Mountains of Oklahoma, in northern Comanche County, had long held secrets about Jesse James and lost gold. Old-timers in the area have whispered for decades about buried outlaw treasure that could only be found by interpreting symbols and other clues left carved on rocks and into trees. These were secret codes known only to members of a shadowy, Confederate, post-Civil War organization. Optimistic treasure hunters have traveled these hills for decades in search of any sign that would lead them to $2 million in gold bullion the James gang stole from a Mexican government transport not long after the American Civil War. In 1901, the unassigned Indian land surrounding this mountainous region was open to white settlers. Residents of the area heard tales about the buried outlaw treasure, but may have believed them to be only legend. That changed in 1907, when Frank James, himself, returned to the area and settled on a 160-acre farm, 2 miles north of Fletcher. It seemed odd that the 64-year-old, retired outlaw would suddenly decide to return to this rural and undeveloped area, where he had traveled through decades earlier, just to grow peaches. Local residents noticed that Frank didn't seem to spend much time down on the farm. His days were spent crisscrossing the landscape, where he formerly rode with his brother and their various associates, obviously in search of something. During one week, while making house calls near Apache, Dr. L.C. Neer repeatedly observed the old outlaw sitting on his horse atop a hill and staring intently to the south. Within a few months of his return, Frank determined that the location he sought was then on farmland owned by Mrs. Belle Headland. He paid the widow a visit to learn whether certain landmarks could still be found on her property, before finally introducing himself. Primarily, he was searching for an old spring near where the gang used to camp, which also marked the location of a large, flat rock with a map carved on the underside. Luckily for Frank, Mrs. Headland found the old outlaw to be a gentleman, and gave him permission to return on many occasions over the next several months. Frank discovered a few old treasure signs to help direct him, and is alleged to have retrieved a copper kettle that contained $6,000 in gold. Old-timers around the Wichitas who knew Frank claim that he did locate much of the buried gold he sought, and wore out 6 horses in the bargain. Unfortunately, due to the evolved landscape, he was never able to locate the strange rock in question, nor the items to which they led. After 7 years in Oklahoma, Frank decided to cut his losses and return with his wife, Ann, to their home to Missouri, where he died a year later. In 1932, Joe Hunter was a Rush Springs police officer when an elder gentleman stopped by the station to pay him a visit. The stranger introduced himself only as Cook, and then asked the officer if they could go someplace private before he told his tale. About 3 miles outside of town, Cook explained to Hunter that he had known his father, and he wanted him to have these treasure charts. The 3 maps, 2 on cowhide and 1 on a goatskin, would lead to treasure that he claimed to have buried with Hunter's father 62 years earlier. The stranger further described a location in the Wichita Mountains, where a flat rock could be found on which an additional map had been carved on the underside. The elder gentleman, perhaps in his 80s, explained that he was too old to go looking for blood money. After their chat, the men returned to town and Cook departed. Their meeting had played out like an opening scene of a movie, where an old stranger appeared, only once, to advance the plot, and then Hunter never saw him again. Due to Cook's vivid description of the area, Hunter found the flat rock in the Wichita Mountains with the map. Although the trail was warm, it would take years for the lawman turned treasure hunter to locate vital clues. Hunter was further aided by another enigmatic elder gent who discovered 2 similar maps hidden in the false bottom of a small chest that he had owned for 5 years. More than 30 years after Frank James left the state, Mrs. Headland found the strange, flat map rock he had sought on her property. Hunter read about the event in the local paper, and soon paid her a visit. The information disclosed on the rock, along with the earlier maps he had acquired, sent him to the north base of a nearby stone landmark known as Buzzard's Roost, where he dug up an iron teapot that contained gold bullion, jewels, a watch, and, most importantly, a rolled sheet of copper. The sheet was unrolled to reveal yet another map. Hunter gave the gold he found on Mrs. Headland's land to her, and kept the rest of the items. Especially, the coded map that led him 30 miles southwest, deep into the Wichitas, where he discovered additional, tedious clues to decipher. In 1948, 2 years later, Hunter was finally led to the cedar tree-lined base of Tarbone Mountain. It was there, concealed under a rock ledge, where he found what Frank James, and many others since, had strove but failed to obtain. In the winter of 1876, Frank and Jesse James, along with Cole Younger, and 9 other gang members whose names have been lost to history, found themselves snowed in the Wichitas after having robbed a Mexican gold transport south of the Texas border near Chihuahua. After hiding their plunder, a contract, binding the men together as the rightful owners of the gold, was carved into the side of a brass bucket, dated March 5, 1876, and hidden under a rock ledge at the foot of Tarbone Mountain. The contract held more treasure clues, followed by the men's names, which included Frank and Jesse James. After more than 7 decades, Hunter retrieved the valued brass bucket which contained more of the Mexican bullion. Within this same proximity, he also dug up a 3-legged Dutch oven containing more gold, and a chain and fob that matched the watch found in the iron teapot unearthed on Mrs. Headland's farm. On Sunday, February 29, 1948, the banner headline on the front page of the Lawton Constitution read, "Lawton Trio believes end of trail is near in 16-year search for fabulous treasure in expansive Wichitas." The article included photos of some of the various items discovered, including the Dutch oven and the brass bucket carved with the brass bucket contract. Since then, the trail has gone cold, but that hasn't stopped Hunter and many other dedicated treasure hunters from their search. At least one other treasure stash hidden by the James gang, estimated at $180,000, remains somewhere in the Wichitas, unclaimed. Their legend continues to haunt the hills and old outlaw trails they formerly rode.
Number 3.
On February 3, 1552, the Portuguese galleon Sao Joao, captained by Manuel de Souza, began its homeward voyage from Cochin, India towards Portugal. The ship carried a fully loaded cargo including an inventory of around 7,000 quintals of pepper. On March 11th, the Sao Joao was sailing north-northwest, 25 leagues from the Cape of Good Hope, when she was assaulted by a storm from the west, forcing the crew to sail her close to shore to protect her cargo at all costs, as they had no sails to spare. The crew headed landward with the sails of the foremast half furled, fearing they would lose foresail if it were used on its own. Approximately 130 leagues from the Cape, the wind changed to the northeast, forcing the ship to turn south by southwest. Winds coming from both the east and the west caused the galleon to flood with so much water that she was on the verge of sinking. This storm continued for 3 days until it calmed, soon after the carpenter discovered that the storm had removed 3 pintleys from the rudder, putting the remainder of the voyage in grave danger. The captain ordered the condition of the rudder to be kept a secret aboard most of the ship, as to not lower morale. Soon after, strong winds tore the mainsail from the yard, while the waves hit the ship with such force that they caused the rigging and beams on the port side to explode into pieces. In a desperate attempt to regain control of the ship, the crew cut down the remains of the mast and yard to make a new mast on the stump from a section of a spar. On this, they attached yards to create a makeshift storm sail and foremast. However, this provisional setup was quickly destroyed by the wind, while the waves soon tore away the rotten rudder. When the mainmast fell from its place, it knocked the bowsprit over, lodging it inside the ship. Lacking a mast, sails, and rudder, the crew desperately tried to head for shore. The next 10 days were spent attempting to create a makeshift rudder from various parts of the ship and sails from textiles. The new rudder proved entirely fruitless, as the measurements did not fit the original, and it was quickly lost to the sea. Luckily, land was finally sighted on June 8, and a small boat was swiftly taken on a scouting mission to find a safe area on which to lay anchor. The plan was to tie landlines from the shore to the ship and take a small boat in alternating trips, transporting passengers and cargo from the ship to the beach. From there, they intended to build a temporary fort from barrels and build a small caravel from leftover ship parts to send a message to the closest Portuguese fortress at Sofala, on the east coast of Africa. However, after the third trip across, the Sao Joao began to slowly sink with only 30 people onshore. On the third day of the exodus, the pilot who was still on board the Sao Joao noticed the sea line had been cut, and it would not be long before the rest of the ship broke up against the coast. He and 40 others quickly boarded a lifeboat and sailed to shore, where the boat crashed on the beach, while all the passengers landed without harm. At this point, more than 500 individuals were still on the ship, including 200 Portuguese and 300 slaves. From the shore, the ship was let out by the landline and allowed to drift towards the beach. As the ship went aground, it first broke in two portions, with one half from mast forward and the second from mast to the stern. Within an hour, these two pieces became four, with the deck soon breaking up, allowing the cargo to float towards the sea. The remaining stranded survivors clung to the floating wreckage. Most made it to shore, though about 40 Portuguese and 70 slaves reportedly drowned in the process. It is estimated that the worth of the cargo to float towards the beach was at least 1,000 gold pieces. The ship was recorded to have wrecked on June 7, 1552 at 31 degrees south. Onshore, there was not enough wreckage recovered to create a makeshift boat as originally intended. However, the survivors were able to build a fort from chest and barrels. The Portuguese stayed on the beach for 12 days before deciding to venture on, as the wrecking of the ship was far from the end of the survivors' suffering. Over the next 5.5 months, approximately 80 Portuguese and 100 slaves would march an estimated 300 leagues, fording rivers and crossing marshes to reach salvation. Although the shipwreck site is only 600 kilometers from today's Maputo, likely, the survivors walked at least twice that distance. During the march, many would die from starvation, dehydration, and skirmishes with the local tribes. The situation was so dire that at times the captain offered hundreds of cruzados to anyone willing to go off and find water. The goal of the party was to reach the river previously discovered by Lourenço Marques, which emptied into Boa Paz, as the survivors were sure to find passing Portuguese ships in this area. Along the march, the survivors ran into a mixture of friendly and fiendish native tribes. For instance, after ignoring the kindness of a benevolent indigenous king, who had warned them of the insidious nature of his neighbors, the latter supposedly tricked and robbed them of their possessions before stripping them naked. After such an event, it was reported that the wife of the captain, Leonor de Sá, was so embarrassed that she buried herself in the sand and refused to move ever again, perishing in this spot. Not long after, the captain, Manuel de Souza, was said to have wandered into the jungle and was never seen again. Both occasions post-date the prior abandonment of their child along the trek. All tragedies aside, the journey was not without its salvation. Eventually 8 Portuguese and 17 slaves had made it to their river destination, and were rescued by a sailing Portuguese ivory merchant, who heard local rumors that there were Portuguese castaways in the land, and ransomed out a search party to find them. By the 25th of May 1553, the survivors were finally safe as they reached Mozambique, months after the wrecking of the Sao Joao.
Number 4.
The HMS Hussar, a 28-gun British warship, was on its way to Rhode Island via the East River in November 1780. On board, according to several whisperings, was gold to the value of at least $4 million. The Hussar sank in the tidal strait between Astoria and Ward's Island, also known as Hell Gate. Survivors of the incident later claimed that the treasure had been delivered to its intended destination before the ship sank. During the American Revolution, the 28-gun Royal Navy frigate HMS Hussar sailed as a dispatcher on what the Navy called its North American station. By July 1779, the British positions around New York became vulnerable when the French army joined forces with General George Washington's troops north of the city. Just before British Admiral George Bridges Rodney took his fleet of 20 ships south toward Virginia in November, he ordered a destination change on what was purported to be the delivery of general provisions and the English troops' payroll. The admiral ordered the dispatcher to set sail for Gardiner's Bay, where an island outpost at the eastern end of Long Island Sound was used to stock wartime supplies. On November 24, 1779, Captain Charles Pole decided to take the HMS Hussar on a shorter, faster route to Gardiner's Bay. Despite his pilot's repeated warnings, Pole stuck with his plan to sail from New York's East River through the risky waters of Hell Gate, a narrow channel that lies between Manhattan and Long Island. Shortly before reaching Long Island Sound, strong winds and tides drove the vessel onto Pot Rock, one of many obstructions impeding ships sailing the passage between the Atlantic Ocean and New York City. Leaking profusely, the 124-foot ship sank in 90 feet of water as the captain and crew manned long boats and made it to the mainland. Various accounts of the tragedy emerged, but the British immediately denied that any payroll of gold, guineas or sterling silver was consigned on the voyage. Yet, reports spread that $2 to $4 million worth was aboard ship. The survivors never mentioned a valuable cargo, nor was there any listed on the cargo manifest. The Brits offered many denials of the payroll delivery, but were suspect when they conducted extensive salvage efforts. They salvaged some cannons and ship's fittings, but records revealed nothing about specie, what they called coins. The wreck was dynamited when salvage was over. In 1876, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers used 25 tons of explosives that blew the harrowing aspects of the Hell Gate's rocky bottom right back to hell. In spite of all this destruction, salvage efforts continued throughout the years. In the 1930s, submarine pioneer Simon Lake spent years and much of his fortune vainly searching for the wreck. In 2013, after Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast, recollections of the HMS Hussar surfaced, pun intended. Perhaps the violent storm had churned the waterway enough to wash remnants of the ship ashore. New Yorker Steve Smith, walking the South Bronx shoreline after the storm, discovered wooden planks from a very old shipwreck. But this wasn't unusual. Hell Gate is full of old wrecks and Smith found no coins. Rumors circulated that the late Robert Marks, a successful salver and author, found some coins on the Hussar site. He denied it and wrote in his book, Shipwrecks in the Americas, "I have come across no documentary evidence to support the claim of treasure aboard the HMS Hussar, although there have been articles written for years that say the ship was carrying a large amount of it. Salvage companies have given up, but divers still search for the treasure." Bob Sterner of Freeport, Long Island, an accomplished shipwreck diver and former editor of Immersed magazine, gives fair warning. "Many divers don't realize the conditions," he says. "Just in driving past Hell Gate, the waters appear angry. The currents are unpredictable as they swirl in one direction, then another, always moving and boiling like a hot pot. Slack tide lasts about 15 minutes. Captain Dan Berg of Aqua Explorers, Baldwin, New York, has been diving the wrecks of New York and New Jersey for more than 30 years. His books, Wreck Valley Volumes 1 and 2, are comprehensive guides describing the dive conditions and history behind 100 wrecks off the New Jersey coast and Long Island's South Shore. He has won awards for his Shipwreck television series and received accolades for side-scan surveys conducted with Marine Sonic Technology Limited. A highly respected maritime historian, Berg says of the HMS Hussar, "From my diving experience and research, I for one haven't found any proof that a treasure exists. Some divers say the British frigate's remains, if any survived, are beneath a landfill in the Bronx. This might have merit considering New York's continued infrastructure additions including roads, buildings and parking lots." In Kim Stanley Robinson's 2017 science fiction novel, New York 2140, a subplot centers on an attempt to recover 2 chests of gold from the wreck of the HMS Hussar that lies under a submerged parking lot in the former Bronx. The vessel still holds tidbits of adventure. After all, its name was taken from the swashbuckling light cavalry regiments of European armies in the late 17th and 18th centuries. The legend of the treasure aboard the Hussar continues to stir the imagination. Who knows, maybe the next tempestuous storm at Hellgate will wash some coins ashore. Time will tell, and treasure seekers are patient.
Number 5.
Can you find lost treasure in Hawaii? Yes. Although the tropical islands boast a typical tourist destinations, roving families will also find that there is much more to Hawaii than the typical. Girl with Fossilthy Hawaii Islands also claim unique adventures that will help families create special moments that can be treasured forever. Available Hawaii treasure hunting activities include fossil hunting, lava fossil searches, looking for gold on the island's beautiful beaches, geocaching and visiting the King Kamehameha burial chamber. The Hawaiian Islands were formed from volcanic activity and all of the islands are made up of at least one primary volcano. The Big Island is actually made up of 5 major volcanoes including the active volcanoes, Mauna Kea and Kilauea. The numerous lava flows on the Big Island have helped to preserve many fossils of plant and animal life, and makes the region ideal for finding lost treasure in Hawaii. One place on the Big Island perfect for Hawaii treasure hunting for fossils is Lava Tree State Monument, about 3 miles from the town of Pahoa. This is a great stop in your family travel adventures. The free public park is an eerie forest of fossilized tree trunks left behind from a lava flow that occurred in 1790. Another exciting location ideal for families looking for fossils or lost treasure in Hawaii is a visit to the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. At the park, families can see active eruptions of Mauna Loa and the Kilauea crater, and get as close to cooling lava trails as they dare. Eastward of the park at the Wakupanaha area, families can see lava flowing into the ocean, and the area is perfect for finding preserved debris. The national park also includes a stark, 18-mile trail known as the Kau Desert Trail and Warrior Footprints, where human footprints are preserved in ash. It is believed that these footprints were formed in 1790 by a massive lava eruption. Popular legend states the footprints belonged to an army that attempted to challenge King Kamehameha. The warriors camped at the volcano, and as many as 400 died while trying to retreat from the falling ash. To enter the national park, a small fee is required. Camping, however, is free. Another great stop to add to your family travel adventures. One of the most exciting activities enjoyed when visiting Hawaii is the search for lost treasure in Hawaii. Using a metal detector, it is possible to search for treasure on land or sea. Such vacations combine the typical beach adventure with active fun and the feeling of going on an adventure. Hawaii generally has pleasant weather all year round, making it possible to use a metal detector, no matter when you visit. A simple stroll along a popular tourist location could lead to finding gold jewelry or silver coins. Wondering where to start treasure hunting in Hawaii? One Hawaiian legend that may be worth investigating is a visit to Palamano Point. Palamano Point is an exposed reef break off Hawaii's Big Island that is a popular spot for surfers. The area supposedly contains over $5 million in buried pirate treasure in the form of silver and gold that is said to have belonged to the English pirate Captain Cavendish. The beaches of Maui are also great spots for Hawaii treasure hunting. Searches have found lost jewelry and even ancient gold treasures. Instead of spending long days simply looking at the same old tourist spots, families in Hawaii can go fortune hunting outdoors for lost treasure in Hawaii. Geocaching is the new version of treasure hunting, armed with handheld global positioning system, GPS, devices. Families can search for hidden containers all around the islands. On the island of Oahu alone, there are well over 1,000 buried treasures to be found. Geocaching encourages a spirit of community. After finding the treasure, geocachers can take pictures and share their stories online with other geocachers. Of course, the search for lost treasure in Hawaii would not be complete without searching for the King Kamehameha burial chamber. The state's most famous ruler died in 1819, but his burial chamber has never been located. Legend has it that the king was buried with a vast treasure trove of jewels including diamonds. There are various theories about where the king's burial chamber may be located, and these conflicting theories can affect where you start your Hawaii treasure hunting adventure. Some believe he was buried in a cave in the rainforest, while others believe he is buried on the Napali coast, on the island of Kauai. Even though you probably will not find the king's burial place, you might find some other great treasures along the way, while on your family travel adventures.
Number 6.
Some say that it, or part of it, was buried in the Lowveld area, whilst others claim that a substantial amount of it was taken with President Kruger when he fled to Europe towards the end of 1900. What is known is that on the 4th of June 1900, President Kruger and his closest associates began preparations to leave the country. They left Pretoria by train and headed for Machadodorp in the Lowveld. Here they set up offices and apartments in the train carriages, and remained there until the time came for them to cross the border to Mozambique and leave for Europe from there. Legend has it, though, that the train also carried a large freight of gold coins and bars, and the story gained credibility a few days later when Lord Milner discovered that a huge amount of money had been removed from the SA Mint and National Bank. The final tally revealed that over £1.5 million was unaccounted for when Milner took control of the Republic. In fact, after further investigation it became clear that President Kruger's government had started taking possession of gold from the banks and mines a few months before the war had even started, as a preventative measure to ensure it didn't land up in enemy hands. In 1905, 5 years after this happened, a man came forward and claimed that he was hired, along with 2 other men, by the Tsar government to bury gold, coins and diamonds to the value of £2 million. John Holtzhausen made this declaration while he was imprisoned on an unrelated charge and stated that he was actually on his way to the treasure when he was arrested for stealing a horse and carriage. Unfortunately, the other 2 men involved, Pretorius and Swartz, had since been killed, and ultimately he was the only living person able to refute this remarkable story. Of course, he disappeared without disclosing any further details of the treasure, except that it was buried 50 miles north of the Blyde River and north of Leidesdorp. Whilst history has since disproved the existence of the Kruger Millions, there are still many hopefuls who believe that this treasure of gold and rare coins remains buried on South African soil. To add fuel to the speculation, there are news stories such as these that lead historians and treasure hunters to believe that the hoard does exist and may one day be discovered. Some say that if found, it could become one of the most significant discoveries in the world. After all, £2 million in 1900 is estimated to be worth over $250 million today. Although some say that the original amount stashed is largely exaggerated, the fact remains that any gold bars and rare South African coins in that hoard would be incredibly valuable in today's market, not forgetting the major historical significance surrounding them. Unfortunately, we may never discover the true history of the missing Kruger Millions, or if they are in fact still somewhere in South Africa. What we do know is that the possibility of discovering a treasure that exceeds your wildest dreams is enough to keep the faithful positive that it does indeed exist.
Number 7.
Time to hit another Jacobite legend and unravel some of the mysteries of its tales. This time we are looking at the legend of Prince Charles Edward Stuart's Jacobite gold. The legend tells of up to 7 casks of gold coins being landed on the west coast of Scotland by 2 French frigates, the Bellona and Mars, in late April 1746. The ships had not heard of the recent defeat of the Jacobites at Culloden, and were rushing to help the Jacobites. As the French ships landed, they were spotted by government warships and they hastily unloaded their cargo so they could head out to meet the incoming warships. After some tense fighting, the French apparently damaged one of the British warships and were able to make their escape back to France, leaving their precious cargo behind. It is said the money was unloaded at Loch Nanuam in Arkaig, and the caskets then brought up to Loch Arkaig, near Fort William, and hidden. Many believe the location's secret was entrusted to Murray of Broughton, one of the Jacobite fugitives. Murray began the distribution to clan chiefs, but when he was arrested by the government and turned king's evidence against the Jacobites, the treasure was entrusted first to Donald Cameron of Lochiel, and then to Ewan Macpherson of Cluny, chief of Clan Macpherson, who was hiding in a cave at Ben Alder. Over the months that followed, it is believed the god was reburied multiple times to prevent the government from finding it and making it tricky to follow its path. Cluny is believed to have held on to the gold's location for many years and supposedly used it to help fugitive Jacobite men where he could. Some of the money seems to have got back to Charles in the 1750s, but the total amount of gold was never recovered. Cluny was never able to account for all of the money, and years later Prince Charles is said to have accused Cluny of embezzling it. The whereabouts of the missing gold caused quite a stir amongst the surviving Jacobites, and in 1753, Dr. Archibald Cameron, the brother of Cameron of Lochiel, was sent to locate the missing money. While in Scotland, he was unfortunately captured after his location was betrayed and was charged for his part in the 45 Rising. He was sentenced to death and was executed in London on 7 June 1753. After Cameron was killed, the trail then goes cold. Many still believed the gold was hidden, most likely buried, somewhere near Loch Arkaig, but none could ever find the stash. In the 1850s there were apparently some French and Spanish gold coins found in the right area, but nothing substantial that could be claimed as the missing Jacobite gold. Today it is still a mystery as to where the treasure may be hidden. Some believe it must be hidden near Cluny's cage, where Cluny lived in hiding for years after the defeat at Culloden. Small hints have been found over the years with references to the gold appearing in the Clan Cameron archives, which suggest before Dr. Cameron was arrested he hid the gold at Callockburn, and there was also a letter found in 2003 in a second-hand shop which recorded the deathbed confession of Neil Ian Ruairí. Ruairí claimed to have passed Loch Arkaig as the treasure was being buried. The letter claims he was hiding when clansmen buried the gold, and when they left he helped himself to a bag of coins. Upon hearing voices he snatched the bag and headed to Arkaig, burying the bag on his way. Unfortunately, as he made his escape he fell from his horse and was badly injured. On his deathbed he gave directions to his buried gold, stating it was buried near Arkaig under a black stone with a tree root springing from it. The letter surfaced in 1911, when a doctor in the Arkaig area, Alexander Campbell, was presented with it by a grateful elderly patient. He apparently searched for the gold, but found nothing, and letter went missing until it was found in 2003. The treasure has been searched for many times, but no one has ever found the missing Jacobite gold, so, if any is hidden, then the Jacobites certainly did a good job, and who knows how long it will be before it is found.
Number 8.
The diary that was in the possession of a secret society for decades after the end of World War II may contain a map detailing the location of more than 30 tons, 28 metric tons, of gold that was hidden by the Nazis. Written 75 years ago by a Waffenschütz SS officer using the pseudonym Michaelis, this journal outlined Nazi commander Heinrich Himmler's plans to hide stolen European riches, artifacts and priceless works of art, according to Polish news site The First News, TFN. The diary listed 11 sites where Nazis concealed looted gold, jewels, priceless paintings and religious objects. One location that it names is an abandoned well that extends nearly 200 feet, 60 meters, underground, beneath the 16th century Hochberg Palace in the village of Roztoka, in southwestern Poland. The gold at the bottom of the well is thought to have come from the Reichsbank in the Polish town of Breslau, now Rockbaugh, and is estimated to be worth billions of euros, TFN reported on May 26. For decades after the war, the Michaelis diary was kept secret, hidden away in the town of Quedlinburg, Germany. It was in the possession of a Masonic lodge that has existed as a secret society for more than 1,000 years, and counted elite Nazi officers among its members during the time of the Third Reich. One member, allegedly, was Michaelis, who controlled Nazi transport in southwestern Poland, TFN reported. Lodge members in later years included descendants of Nazi officers, according to TFN. But in 2019, the lodge gave the diary to a Polish foundation named Silesian Bridge. The foundation announced in March of last year that it had received the journal from its German partners, the lodge members in Quedlinburg, who gifted the journal to the people of Poland as an apology for World War II, TFN reported. Included with the journal was a map that purportedly pinpointed the location of the well on the Hochberg Palace grounds, where the Nazi treasure was hidden. Roman Fermaniak, a representative of Silesian Bridge, told TFN. Additional documents suggest that after the Nazis hid their ill-gotten riches, they murdered witnesses, dumped the bodies in the well, and then detonated explosives to seal the entrance, Fermaniak told TFN. Experts have determined that the diary was written at the time of World War II, but the journal's authenticity has yet to be confirmed by Poland's Ministry of Culture and National Heritage, Ministry Representative Magdalena Tomaszewska told TFN. However, the palace stands in Lower Silesia, a region in Poland that gained notoriety during and after World War II as a location where the Nazis concealed goods stolen from wealthy Jews, as well as art that had been looted from museums and galleries, according to the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Lower Silesia was riddled with caves, mines and tunnels, as well as castles and palaces with cavernous dungeons, which offered the Nazis plenty of hiding places for even very large works of art, according to the ministry. After the war, the U.S. government's Art Looting Intelligence Unit, ALU, linked a director of the Silesian Museum named Gunther Grundmann to stolen art in Lower Silesia. Grundmann created a list of 80 sites in Lower Silesia, one of which was the Hochberg Palace, where he concealed precious objects and wealth. But many of these caches are thought to have been looted by the invading Russian army as they marched through on their way to Germany, according to the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Nazis plundered an estimated 5 million European artworks from Jews, museums and private collections, and a team of 350 Allied officers and experts known as Monuments Men, an investigative unit of the ALU, were tasked with tracking them down after the end of the war, ABC News reported in 2013. At one site alone, a salt mine complex in Altaussee, Austria, there were thousands of stolen paintings, illustrations, rare books, statues and tapestries. A cache of explosives in the mine complex was meant to have been blown up in the event of Germany's defeat, but the explosives were never detonated, ABC News reported. About 63,000 artworks and cultural artifacts that were stolen from Polish Jews by the Nazis are still missing, and the Polish government is actively working to secure their return, the New York Times reported in January. However, officials in Poland have themselves been criticized for failing to return paintings in national museum collections that were stolen by the Nazis from Jewish collectors in the Netherlands, according to the Times. As for the alleged golden hoard under Hochberg Palace, the owners plan to refurbish and restore the building, which has fallen into disrepair, and upcoming conservation work will include a search for the long-buried well, TFN reported.